according to my clock, it's 11:30 in Ohio. Today we are going to do sugar cookies. Forgive me, I'm looking at the screen over here because I thought I could be smart and put the video up on a secondary screen because my eyes are getting old and I can't read comments as they come up because I broadcast this from my phone. It's not cooperating, so I'm not going to worry about it today. So I think several people have seen over the last few months, sugar cookies are great. We do them at Christmas, we do them at Easter, we do them for birthdays, they're good for Mother's Day, Father's Day. The great thing about sugar cookies is you get a different cookie cutter or repurpose one of the cookie cutters you have, and you can do any occasion you want with cookies. And it's a really simple recipe. So today I'm going to show you how to make the cookies, and then I'm going to show you how you can decorate the cookies. And hopefully this is all stuff, unless you don't keep real butter, you're going to have to buy some real butter. It's all stuff that anybody who does even a little bit of baking should already have in the house. So in an effort to keep this from running all day, we're going to get started. You're going to start with 1 cup, which is 2 sticks of butter. I leave the butter out usually overnight because you want it soft, but you do not want it melted. So if you forget, like I occasionally do, to put it out the night before and you need to soften it, you can put it in the microwave, do about 10 seconds at a time and turn it, and usually 1 or 2 bursts of 10 seconds is more than enough to get it soft. If it goes past soft and starts to melt, you don't have butter anymore, you have oil, and that's not going to work. So you put your 2 sticks of softened butter into a bowl. This recipe does work well if you just have a hand mixer. You don't have to have a big fancy KitchenAid. Because I have a big fancy KitchenAid, I just do everything in it. My hand mixer broke a while back and I just never replaced it because I do everything in here. So you're going to start with your 2 sticks of butter. To that, you're going to add 1 cup of sugar. My Pampered Chef flexible mixing bowls, love them. It's going to get noisy, forgive me in advance. This won't be run too much during this video, but there's no way to avoid it. We're just creaming the sugar and the butter together. I'm not going to talk too much during this part because I don't know how well you can hear me anyway. If the butter's soft, it doesn't take real long. And what you will get is a nice, soft, creamy mixture. If you're using a mixer like this, you need to scrape down the sides a little bit to make sure everything gets back in the middle, because as we add the rest of the ingredients, you don't want all the butter and sugar stuck to the side. So we're going to scrape this down real quick. Then you're going to add 2 eggs. Any good chef, especially a French pastry chef, will tell you your eggs should be at room temperature. I've used the eggs cold. I don't know that it makes a huge difference in this recipe, but once you get into a habit, I always set my eggs out when I'm starting to get all the ingredients together so that by the time I'm ready to mix them, they've hit room temperature. So on top of those 2 eggs, you're also going to add a ½ teaspoon of vanilla. I'm going to let this mix again. Sorry, it's going to get noisy. You want to let this mix for about a minute. I'm sorry you can't see down inside this mixer, but I'll tip the bowl here in a second so you can see. You will see pretty quickly. We'll see if I can tip this so you can actually see down in there. You may or may not be able to, but I'm going to try for fun. everything, when the yolk from the eggs and the yellow is nice and evenly mixed around, it's mixed enough, because we're going to start adding flour and it's going to run some more. But again, scrape your sides down if you're using an electric mixer, because you don't want all the good stuff stuck up on the sides of the bowl. You want it down in there. So you got to poke around the paddle blade a little bit as well. Alright, for the sake of time, I have pre-measured out 3 1/4 cups of flour. And don't worry about writing all this stuff down. If you go to oldguykitchen.com to the blog, in the search bar, just type in sugar cookies. The recipe is there. You don't have to write all this down and remember all this. But if you're paying attention, 3 1/4 cups of flour, to which we're going to add, now see, I went and got my teaspoon wet, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda. If I can get that to measure correctly. Once again, live, things don't always go exactly as planned. And 1 teaspoon of salt. You're getting exactly what you'd get if you were sitting here in my kitchen with me making this. This is not a made-for-TV production. This is me making cookies. Alright, you want to give this a good stir. Ideally, you've got your baking soda and your salts and your baking powder kind of mixed in with the flour. It just helps because we're going to start adding this to the butter and egg mixture. If it's already sort of mixed in with the flour, it just helps to make sure you get good distribution. Because you want your cookies to come out nice and fluffy. You don't want pockets of all the salt or all the baking powder in one place. It just doesn't end well. So we're going to add about a cup of this to the mix, and it's going to get noisy again. Well, I see Courtney K is watching, my niece. Hi Courtney, I see you. Okay, once that gets nicely incorporated, we're just going to keep adding this about a cup at a time. You can see the flour coming up out of the bowl while you wear an apron. Alright, we're getting there. This is also not usually where my mixer sits, but I didn't figure you'd want to look at the back of my head over there in the corner while I was making this, so in an effort to make this a little more bearable to watch, I moved the mixer over here on the counter. Come on. It helps to start off slow if you don't want to get a flour bath. Alright, we're going to put just the last of that in there. Come on, everybody. Give it one last round. It's terribly exciting stuff. Because what you're going to have now is a nice dough, if you can see that. This is where having your scraper handy. You just want to scrape the excess off of here. I'm sure this is terribly exciting to watch. This is why on TV cooking shows they edit this. Okay, now we're gonna give one last little scrape here to get everything off the sides, make sure any bits of flour or butter that didn't get fully mixed in while the blade was running get turned around in here. But what you've got is just a good basic cookie dough. The reason I like this recipe is because I tried a lot over the years of different sugar cookie recipes, and this is the one that I have found that my sugar cookies don't spread out when I bake them. So if you want cookies that actually hold the shape of your cookie cutter, this is the recipe. Before you can start cutting these out and baking with them, you need to chill them. So this is where I'm going to take some Glad wrap here. And I divide the dough in half, so we're going to cut 2 pieces. Because once this stuff gets cold, you want to work with it about half at a time. So by dividing it in half and refrigerating it in 2 pieces, you can work with 1 piece, leave the other half in the fridge, because you don't want it to warm up. It's the coldness that helps everything hold its shape. So you're going to take your dough and divide this roughly in half. That feels like about half. We're going to put a nice chunk on each piece. For the sake of all you watching this, I'm not going to be as cheap as I normally am and scrape every last shred out of the bowl. I'm going to leave a little bit in there. So I just press it down into a disc. It doesn't have to be super flat. I like to get it down to about a 1/2 inch thick. Do that with both pieces. And you just take your saran wrap, or whatever plastic wrap you choose. If Saran wants to pay me to promote their product, I guess they can, but they don't. Flip these over, and we're going to set both of these in the refrigerator. It needs to refrigerate at least a 1/2 hour. You want it to get good and firm. Alright, so we're going to unwrap that in a second. The first thing you want to do is dust your countertop with a little bit of flour. Yeah, you're going to make a mess. Everything cleans up with water, don't worry about it. Okay, now you'll have, once this has been in the refrigerator for a little while, you're going to have a nice hard, you want a little bit of flour underneath it, you want a little bit of flour on top of it. Just give it a good shake. Then I'm take a rolling pin. I cheat. These lovely little rings you can buy any place that sells baking supplies. They come in different colors, and each color is set to a different thickness. I have found if I set my thickness for this recipe to 1/4 inch, I pretty consistently get 3 dozen cookies out of one batch of what we just made. Not just because I'm cheap do I put the measures on there though. The 1/4 inch thickness is actually helpful because you want a flat surface. Later on when we decorate these, we're going to flood coat, which is using a very thin, almost cream thickness icing. You don't want a cookie at an angle because all of your icing will slide to one side. So by using these or any other device to set a nice even thickness so you get a nice flat dough, you will get nice flat cookies. So when it's hard, I found it helps to take your rolling pin and kind of put some dents in it first to get it started, and then you just roll it out. Because it's cold, you're going to get some cracks in it. Don't worry about that, because what we can't use the first pass with the cookie cutter, we're going to wad it all back up and roll it all back out and use it again. So If you see a few cracks in it because it's cold, don't lose sleep over it. Okay. This is probably about as exciting as watching paint dry for you guys, but unfortunately, you want cold dough and you gotta roll it out. I will say, you can use whatever cookie cutter suits the season. There is no right or wrong. You guys get the pleasure, since I am teaching a cookie class locally on Wednesday, we're going to be doing St. Patrick's Day themed cookies, so that's what you're going to get today. I will say these exact same techniques apply to whatever type or design you're doing. It's the same icing, it's the same mixture, the same recipe for the dough, it's the same process. Just use a different shaped cookie cutter or a different color icing, and you can get entirely different designs. Okay, we're getting close here. My cheater rings are almost touching. But because this dough is really cold, it wants to kind of snap back a little bit, so you really have to give it a good roll. When you rework it for the second pass, it doesn't require it. On a cookie sheet, I like to put a piece of parchment paper on the cookie sheet. It makes cleanup easy, the cookies slide right off. You're going to get. While those cookies are baking, we're going to make the icing. It's really simple. You need a nice sturdy measuring cup or small bowl. I'm going to measure out 2 cups of powdered sugar. It helps if I turn this to the side where I can see it. You don't have to be super precise with this, as long as you're in the ballpark. This is a pretty forgiving recipe. Because if it's too thick or too thin, it is really easy to adjust. Alright, there's my big fancy tablespoon. Hang on. I forgot to get out my big fancy tablespoon. For this recipe, 2 cups of powdered sugar. You need 1/4 teaspoon of whatever flavoring you like. For sugar cookies, I really like almond, but in the summer sometimes I'll do lemon. You can do vanilla. At Christmas, if you want to do mint or some other flavor, just find something that is a flavoring that is not an oil. It's a flavoring, either natural or artificial. If you put a flavor in that has oil in it, it can make the icing not want to set up properly. So just try to watch out for it. So you've got your flavoring. We're going to use a tablespoon of light corn syrup, and we're going to use a tablespoon of milk, all that per cup. So you can make this in a small batch. I double it. So for 2 cups, we're going to take everything I just said, because I should have written this down in practice. We're going to double it. So for 2 cups, it's going to be 2 tablespoons of corn syrup, 2 tablespoons of milk, and you're going to end up using a half of a teaspoon of flavoring. And the way we're going to go about this is put your flavoring in first. So this is double batch, so we're going to do this twice. Here's your 1/4 teaspoon times 2. Put your corn syrup in next. There's a rhyme and a reason to the madness here. You're going to put your 1st teaspoon in. It does take a second for the corn syrup to all run out of the spoon. You're going to put your 2nd teaspoon in. It's going to be sticky and messy. Then when it comes to your milk, put about half of the amount of milk you need in first. And we're going to save the second half because I adjust this on the fly. It really, depending on the humidity, depending on how closely I measured my powdered sugar, use the milk to adjust the thickness on this. I use a knife. I know it looks strange, but everything starts out very powdery as we're stirring this around. And you're going to hear that horrible noise, sorry. You'll start to feel it before you can see it. All the liquid ingredients are going to start to ball up in the bottom of this, and they are going to start to pull the powdered sugar together. I know from that angle it probably just looks like this is all just still powdered sugar. Hopefully you can see this is starting to be less of a just giant pile of powdered sugar, and it's starting to stick together slightly. I also hear my cookies are just about done. So we're going to pause and pull some cookies out of the oven. Let's just hold on a second. Alright. Now I have 20 seconds to kill. I stopped stirring too soon. I don't know if you can see this. You can see the sugar's now sort of in lumps. As we start to add just a little bit more milk, this is all going to come together and just be a really thick icing, which we're going to use for piping around the edges. 1 second. Alright, we're going to pull these cookies out. So that you can see these closely. They're not going to be really dark brown. At 6 minutes, they still look a little pale. On the bottoms, they'll be a nice light tan color, but this recipe doesn't get really dark. If you wait for the cookies to look dark on top, your cookies are going to be baked to a dry, crispy awfulness. If you pull them out at 6 minutes, they shouldn't look shiny wet anymore, but they'll still look a very soft color, but you'll get really nice, chewy cookies when you're done decorating. Alright, so we added the 1st tablespoon of milk. The remainder of the milk, that 2nd tablespoon, we're going to add just a little bit at a time, because we're adding just enough that it all sticks together. Because this first round of frosting we want really thick, because we're going to pipe it around the cookies, and you're basically building a dam around the edges to hold the flow coat of icing when you put that on. Alright, this is why I use a knife. You need something, it's going to take a little bit of elbow grease to do this. And again, I add literally a few drops at a time at this point. See if you guys can see this clearly. We're adding this, and you can see now it's coming together as this sort of really thick, goopy, it's all holding. We want it thin enough that you can squeeze it out of a piping bag. So this is still just a scotch too thick, but at this point, just a few drops of water, or milk, sorry, really changes the consistency quickly. I'm trying to do this at an angle where you can see, but that doesn't make it easy for me to see. And now you've got something, it should move a little and stretch, but as you can see, this is going to hold its shape very well when we pipe it out onto the cookies. So at this point, if you want white, depends on the color of your design. If you want white icing, you're done. We're going to put half of this into a piping bag and we're going to thin out the other half for a flood coat, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Because I cheated and did a batch of white already, I'm going to show you how to do colored icing. Since it's St. Patty's Day, we need green. I like to use gel food colors. With this particular icing recipe, the amount of liquid fairly quickly can change the consistency. So if you use liquid food coloring, if you have your icing just the way you want it, and then you add even 4 or 5 drops of thinner liquid food coloring, suddenly your icing is too thin. It's not the end of the world. You can add some powdered sugar to thicken it back up. But I found with the gel food colorings, it doesn't change the consistency, so that's just the route I go. So, first thing we're going to do is make sure all of our icing is down in here. We don't have any good stuff left over hiding anywhere. I'm going to take a nice big glop of this because I want some really bright green frosting. As you can see, it looks almost black in these gels when you first put it in. As we start to stir this around, you will see very quickly that. And then I'll take my knife, I scrape off any extra, because again, I'm a cheapskate and I don't like to waste food coloring. They're not terribly expensive. And you can get these gel food colorings now pretty much any place that sells baking supplies, craft supplies, even Walmart. If you don't go to the baking aisle where the groceries are, where the flour and the sugar is. There's another baking aisle at Walmart stores over by the craft set. They have like office supplies, and then next to that they'll have craft stuff, and then next to that there is an aisle that's all baking, cookie, cake decorating. Because in a minute when I show you the piping bags and some of the other bits I use, you can get all of that. If you have access to a Walmart, they have all of it. If they don't, any sort of craft store, Michael's, Pat Catan's, places like that, have this stuff. And you can get your colorings there, you can get the piping bags and the tips. As we start stirring this around, you'll see very quickly that that green starts to spread out. For St. Patty's Day, I had to use Kelly green because, well, that just seemed appropriate. Now for this part, you really want to mix this in well, because if you have swirls in your icing when you put it in the piping bag, you are likely to get swirls coming out of the bag. If you're trying to make rainbow cupcakes or cookies or things like that, swirls are great. If you're trying to make shamrocks, not so much. So, I don't know if you guys can see that well. We're stirring that around. And now we have a nice evenly green mixture. I'm going to take my spoon and scrape all this off of here. And we're going to use this icing 2 different ways. Half of it at this thickness is going to go into a piping bag. And then we're going to thin the other half out and put it in a bottle to do the flood coating. So for step 1, once again, let me get some stuff out of the way here. Now that we're done with this, you can close up your food coloring. Sometimes, if the color isn't dark enough, you can add more. Just make sure you use a new stick or spoon to dip in. You don't want to get icing into your food coloring. So for this decorating process, You're going to want some sort of squeeze bottle. Again, in most craft stores, Walmart, you can buy these in 2 packs for $2. They're not expensive. You're going to want some sort of pastry bag. If you are frugal and environmentally minded, Pampered Chef sells a great reusable silicone bag that also comes with the tips and the connectors and all that stuff. Because I do a lot of external classes and I'll have 12 or more people, I keep a supply of these disposable bags on hand, and because these are clear, I'm going to use them today so you can kind of see what's going on. So if you're using a disposable bag, you have to cut the tip off of the bag roughly 1 inch up. Then you can buy these little, they're called Quick Connects. Again, in the same part of the store where you can buy the tips for frosting, you can also buy these handy little rubber band looking things, which I'll show you how to use to tie off the end of your bag so your icing doesn't go oozing out the other direction. But you want to disconnect this, and the bigger part with the threads on it goes inside the bag. Just put it on your finger and you want to push it all the way down until it's just coming out at the end of the bag. Then you're going to need a tip. I use the number 3 Wilton tip when I do all of my piping and edging, because a number 3 round tip I find gives a nice height. It's thin enough that it's manageable, but it's thick enough that it holds everything in when we flood coat. You can pick whatever size is comfortable for you. They make circular tips much larger. They make them much smaller for like writing and decorating. But you put the tip on top, you put that quick connect over and screw it down, and now all of this is one nice piece. We're going to put the frosting in here. I find it helps. Don't laugh. This cup we got from the aquarium for the girls is the perfect size for this. Take your bag, turn it about halfway down inside out, because the goal is to get the icing as far down into the tip as you can without touching the sides. It will save you headaches later. But if you turn it about halfway inside out and stretch it over a cup like this, and then work it out, you can now put your icing down in here. If you have friends or people helping you, it's really easy to have them hold it. But since I'm usually doing this when people are asleep or are at work, I figured out a few hacks to do this on my own. Alright, so we're going to take about half of this. I'll do it in about 2 scoops. We're going to take that nice gooey icing. You can see how thick it is. It holds together. If you try this with the spoon and you find that the icing is running off the spoon and you can't get it to hang like that, stop. Add some more powdered sugar, because if it's too thin to hang on to the spoon, it's going to be too thin to stand up and make a nice wall for your boundary on your cookie, and you're going to have problems. So we're going to put about, like I said, roughly half of what we made into this bag. And as you can see now, it's just kind of hanging out in there. If you take and make this far enough out where you can see what I'm doing, lay it on a flat surface and just squeeze until you see the icing make it all the way down to the tip. We're going to twist it off. You can see it's starting to ooze out just a little bit there. This is where these lovely little rubber bands, because they have that hook on them, you pull it around, you pull that little loop through, and it will hold your bag closed. So the other thing I like to do to keep me from losing my mind and to keep my icing from drying out, however many colors I'm going to be using in my cookie design, I will do this process for each color in advance. I find it's helpful. And again, I like the number 3 because it's just the right size. If you put a toothpick down in there, it keeps frosting from oozing out, it keeps air from getting in and drying out. So that's a handy tip. So we're going to do that for the piping thickness. Now we're going to go back to what remains, and you can see this is still nice and thick in the bowl. We're going to add like a half a teaspoon of milk initially, and as you start stirring that in, you will see that it will start to thin really quickly. And the reason I make double batches like this, you could make a batch for piping and then make a separate batch for your flood coat, but it's really, really hard to match icing colors. So if you want your icing on your piping edges to be exactly the same color as your icing that you're flood coating with, if you mix a double batch and color it first, you will have an exact match. We're going to keep adding, about a quarter to a half of a teaspoon at a time of milk. And you can see already this is getting much, much thinner. We're trying to get it to slightly thicker than the consistency of heavy cream, because we need it thin enough that it will flow out of the nozzle of that bottle, but you don't want it too thin because it needs to dry. And if you make it super thin, one, it'll spread everywhere, and two, it will take forever to dry out. So just keep adding a few drops at a time, and you will see pretty quickly that this is now, see now as you tip the bowl, it'll move. I'm going to add just a scotch more, because right now it's so thick, if I get a couple of air bubbles in it while stirring, it's so thick the air bubbles can't pop through. That's too thick. You want it just thin enough that if you get any air bubbles in it, they will find their way out, because if it dries with air bubbles, you'll have air bubbles in your icing. Okay. We are getting there, I promise. So you want to take your bottle and open it up. Do this out where everybody can see. And literally, you're just going to pour this flood coat thickness, and you can see this is flowing easily. I'm just going to pour that down into the bottle, like so. Alright, hang on. Screw your top on. Do this for each color. We're going to be using white and green today, and I already cheated and did this for the white. As you can see, I've got a bag of white and a bottle of white already done. Okay, we're going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see better. But now that we have thick icing for piping and thin icing for flood coating, I'm going to show you what to do with those. So the piping literally is used to create borders around whatever area you want to fill. So for example, if we want to fill this entire shamrock cookie with green, I would take my green piping icing. I would start at the edge here, and I'm simply going to squeeze, and as that string of icing comes out, I'm just going to guide it around the edge of the cookie. You don't want to get too close to the edge, because the cookies tend to have a little bit of a round off on the edges, and so your icing can end up being lower than the top of the cookie, which is bad later when we put the flood coat in. So it helps to stay slightly inside from the edge, but in all, the whole process is fairly forgiving, especially once you try it a couple of times and you get the hang of it. As you come back to the beginning, just want to make sure you touch and just kind of pull to the inside. But you need a solid barrier all the way around, because it's going to contain the flood coat. So this is our thinned out icing that we made. I made some white when nobody was looking, so if you wonder where that magically came from. We're going to start by simply pouring some of this flood coat icing onto the cookie. As you can see, I'm not trying to cover the entire cookie just yet. And then this is a cake pop stick. You can use a toothpick, you can use whatever you like. I find cake pop sticks are a nice size. They're thick enough, you can handle them. As a rule, if I wasn't doing this as a video, I would let that border dry for 10 to 15 minutes. If I'm doing a whole batch of cookies, if I outline everything first, by the time I've outlined the last cookie of a dozen or two of cookies, the first one is more than set. If you're in a real hurry, you can do it as long as your border is thick enough icing to start with. But what you're going to want to do is take your stylus or your toothpick or whatever you've got, and you're just pushing the icing from the flood coat to the edge so that it just touches. If you get an area over here where it feels like, man, I just don't have enough icing to push around, you can always add more. I would encourage you start with less than you think you'll need, because this stuff does spread out. And if you put too much in, it's like overflowing a dam. If you put too much water behind the dam, it will find the low point and it will get out. It's not the end of the world, but you will end up with icing all over your counter, which may not make your day. And again, as you're working through, just add a little more where you think you need it. Push it to where you want it by drawing a line right up the middle, because we want this to be half and half. I mean, the technique here is the same. So you're just basically outlining what part of the cookie do I want to flood coat in this color, and you're working your way around. So now we're going to do half of it in white, and we're going to do half of it. Make sure they touch, pull towards the inside. Okay. I'm going to try to do this one left-handed so that you can see what I'm doing better, not have my hands in the way. So start by touching the first color, and again, you're just drawing, just running a bead. If you've ever caulked a window, you know how to decorate sugar cookies. You're just running right around the edge, and you'll notice I'm not touching the cookie. The tip's actually a little ways off the cookie. It gives me more control over where that goes. And then when you get to the end, you want to make sure you touch, because we're creating that dam to hold that flood coat in. Again, if I was doing this for a whole set of cookies, I would let that dry for, call it 15-ish minutes, or let that one dry while I worked my way around and came back. For the sake of the video and not watching paint dry, we'll go ahead and do this. And you just do the same technique again with two different colors. As a rule, unless you're in a real hurry, I would do this green side and let it dry. I'd work my way around all the cookies that I wanted to do this two-tone look to. I would do all the green first and let it start to set up. It doesn't have to be completely dry, but it helps to have it kind of set up. Because once it's dry, if you accidentally drip a little bit of another color on it, you can wipe it off. If it's still wet and you drip a little bit of another color on it, that color is going to mix with the base. Which, if you want to make spots or stripes or interesting things like that, that's a good thing. You can use it to your advantage and actually intentionally mix the colors. But if you're trying to get a nice clean white on one side and green on the other, it helps to have the one color dry first, because then as I'm filling my white side next, if I allowed this to dry and then I was filling the white and a little came over, if I have a paper towel handy, I can quickly wipe it off and I still have a nice clean white and green side. As you can see, I'm not going to wait. No magic of video editing here. We're doing this live and in real time. So we're going to put our white on there. You want to use a separate stylus. Like I said, I use the Cake Pop sticks because they're a nice thickness. They let you really push them around when you want to, but use a separate one for each color because the colors will bleed into each other. If you use your stylus on more than one color at a time, it will pick it up. And you're just pushing this flood coat into the areas you want it to go, and once it touches the side, it will stay there. And it will, because it's liquid, it will level out and you'll get a nice smooth finish. Now, what I was talking about a minute ago, if, for example, I wanted to add polka dots, while this is still wet, I can take a different color of flood coat and just add some drops, and you will get some nice polka dots. The bigger your drop, the bigger your polka dots will be. Just be careful, you're adding liquid to what's behind the dam. If you overfill that white side to begin with and then add some more polka dots of another color, it will reach a point where it floods over and you'll have icing running down the side. It's not the end of the world, but that cookie's not going to look as good as the rest of them when you do that. So my rule of thumb is start with less than I think I'm going to need. And I've been doing this for a while, so I'm pretty good at judging. I still every once in a while overflow a cookie. It happens. Do it on a surface that you can clean up easily, or if you're going to do this on like your nice dining room table, put some parchment paper or saran wrap or something down on the table first, so any icing that drips down through doesn't end up ruining your good surface. But really, those are the two techniques. You outline and you fill. Now, if I wanted to, when this dried, I could take my white piping icing again and then decorate on top of this. So if you want a stacked look, let that base flood coat dry. You can pipe for design, or you can pipe and fill again. Like if I wanted a big circle for some reason in the middle of this, if I wanted to do a smaller shamrock in the middle, I could pipe the outline of a small shamrock in white and fill it with another flood coat of white, and you can keep stacking those layers until you've created the effect you want. If you want it to be a nice flat one-dimensional finish, you need to do your extra colors while it's wet on wet with the flood coat, like the polka dots. When that dries, it will be smooth. On this one, if I took some white and drew circles with flood coat or with piping icing, you would see the dots sitting up on top of the cookie. With this one, they'll be nice and flat down inside. But really, that's it. I'd love to say that it was far more complicated than this, but any design you see on Pinterest, you're using the same techniques. I will also say, while I'm capping these up, this particular icing I like because it does not use egg whites, so you just don't have to worry about potential contamination. I know a lot of people like to use royal icing. These exact same techniques are what you would do for royal icing. You make a thick batch to pipe, and then you thin it with royal icing. You would thin it with a little bit of water to flood coat. What I have noticed is these with the sugar, the corn syrup, they dry they tend to hold this color and even keep a little bit of a shine because of the corn syrup. If you use royal icing, you'll notice as they dry, the color tends to lighten slightly and you get a very flat, think of this as royal icing is like a flat paint on a wall. This is more like a semi-gloss paint on a wall. It's completely up to you which ones you use, but those are the two techniques. That's all there is to it. As the seasons go on, I'm going to try to post some more. We'll skip this whole tutorial on how to make the frosting and we'll just show some different designs and how to do different styles and shapes. It's a lot of fun. You can repurpose cookie cutters so that what started out as a gingerbread man can turn into an astronaut with a little bit of imagination. So come back when I get some more videos posted and you'll see all sorts of fun stuff.